So I'm not sure if it's because I'm now your advisor why I felt compelled to having this discussion with you all. So for those of you who missed my first presentation to ESW, it was it was essentially a window into what we do in my lab and how it relates to sustainability. But I always tend to key in on the word sustainability and what sustainability really means. In fact, if you have any discussions with professionals who are entrenched in the field of sustainability, one of the things that they would tell you is that sustainability is a very loaded word. Sustainability can mean a lot of things, and if we ever actually try to think about the term sustainability, it's actually it's more of an ambitious goal instead of something that people can actually attain. So what I talked about last time was the notion of circularity and how we're trying to ensure that we're closing the materials loop in any sort of scientific advances that we're trying to make. But what I felt like talking about today kind of relates to a lot of things that we've been seeing socially bubble up in at least across the entire world this year, because everyone was forced to stay at home and essentially pay attention to certain actions that kind of magnified because of everything being at a standstill. So I want to talk about growing and sustaining diversity in STEM fields, using the terminology sustainability and sustainable as somewhat of a entendre in understanding where we are in terms of a community when it comes to human resource development or investing in human capital in terms of sustainability. So this is always my intro to whatever it is I'm talking about and whatever it is I do. I want to remind you all that I am a scientist. I'm a physical scientist. I am not a social scientist. So a lot of the things that I'll be talking about will be from what I call a personal perspective and essentially being one of the thought leaders in the sciences now. I'm always asked these questions about sustainability, and one answer I have now is we have to be able to train a diverse workforce, and that's what we're going to talk about. But in terms of what we do in our lab, we have 3 research thrusts. So the thrusts are soft matter dynamics, where in soft matter dynamics, we try to find new and innovative ways of characterizing materials. So some of our current interests are just looking at how interfaces impact material properties. So those of you who are chemical engineers and maybe the mechanical engineers in the room, you know about this no-slip boundary condition, but it's actually an assumption, right? So we want to understand how do interfaces actually impact fluid flow. When it comes to understanding how materials transmit energy, we want to be able to, at least one goal that we have is being able to harness waste heat from the environment for new functionalities. So what we're trying to fundamentally understand is how materials transmit heat flow under various conditions. Another thrust we have is enabling complex structures, where we're using nature as our guide in terms of designing materials. And this example that I have here is just a colloidal wall that we made that tracked liquid crystal particles. But really what we're trying to do is mimic, at least try to mimic nature in designing next generation materials. The example I always like to use are plants. If you've ever been in my office, I have a few plants. And plants, believe it or not, plants and trees are some of the most robust engineering materials out there, to the point where in China, for example, for scaffolding material, people actually use bamboo because of its great engineering properties. So what we are trying to do in the lab is to see if we can actually make very simplistic models of hierarchical complexity in materials. The last thrust we have is to develop multifunctional materials. So a lot of my talks centered on this concept of multifunctionality, where the issue that we have now with plastic materials, at least this waste issue, is that typically they are single-use items. So what we're trying to do is incentivize recycling by giving materials multiple functions. So in this example that you see here was just a generic polymer film that we were able to show has locomotive capacities under specific environments. And something else that we're trying to do is design an inherently piezoelectric polymer, so that you know, whatever plastic you have in your hand, if it has some of our polymer in it, then it will have the capacity for essentially harnessing vibrational energy to some degree. And then these are just some of the tools that we play with in terms of understanding some of the material behavior. If you ever want to stop by, our lab is in the Olson Research Center, which is on the, I will just say, southwest corner of campus. Or if you know where the police station is, we are in that corner by the police station. So yeah, so we're always very active. In fact, we do have a few undergrads in our lab, and we're always more than open to having more people join us. So on to the topic on hand. So a long time ago, someone held up a picture and asked me this question, and they said, "What do you see?" And, you know, we all would raise our hands, and and everyone would say, "Well, I just see a black dot." And, you know, if I were to ask either, any of you, you'd probably say, "Well, I see a black dot. I also see a kangaroo, and, you know, I see your slide background." So what I'm trying to get us to understand from this slide is that we all have different perspectives of seeing things, right? But in reality, what this is actually a black dot that's on a multivariate surface, right? So we have a black dot that's standing by a kangaroo, that's by this University of Akron sign and all this other signage, right? So what we should always try to do is to gain a complete perspective of things that we're seeing. And that's what we're going to try to focus on. So one of the qualitative trends that I've seen in my training so far is that if you have 3 people, right? So right now, it doesn't matter what their age, gender, or ethnicity is, right? We have 3 people, and they all have the same technical aptitude, right? So they're really good at doing this one thing or multiple things, and they're really excited about this thing that they do, right? They have a lot of ambition and a lot of drive. But for some reason, right, and this is a societal reason now that's probably way beyond the scope of this talk. But for some reason, society will only guarantee that, irrespective of how talented these 3 people are, only one of them will have a reasonable path to that career in this thing that they're so driven to do. And a lot of discussions I've been having this year, just because of the social unrest, kind of stems on this, right? Why does society guarantee a fair shot to only a few people? And what does this have to do with sustainability anyway, right? Because that's where I'm trying to go with this argument. So what we're going to do first is watch a video, then we'll talk about how it connects to sustainability. So a colleague and I kind of felt compelled to talk about this issue in STEM fields. And if you're not familiar with this issue in STEM fields, what I will challenge you all to do next time, well, you're all physically distanced, but if you ever have the opportunity, just kind of look around and kind of take a tally of the ethnic groups that are represented, the genders that are represented, um, to kind of see if this issue of representation has anything to do with the issue of sustainability. I think it does, and we'll talk about why. So this is the video that my colleague and I created. It's very unpolished, and he would be really mad at me if he knew I was actually presenting this to a class, or not to a class, but publicly. We've only shared this privately. But it's a very interesting story. And let's see if it works. And hopefully you can hear it.
Dr. McKenzie, there's no sound if there's supposed to be sound.
Oh, let me pause it. Hold on. There is sound. How do I fix the sound?
So
Let's
to fix
see.
the sound is stop sharing content, and then when you go back and click share content again, there should be a slider above your options for your window, and it says include computer sound.
Ah,
that's the issue.
thank you. I learn something every day. So let me stop sharing. Let's start again. I have so many windows. I think it's this one. I heard your instructions, but here we go. Include system audio. There we go. All right, so let's try this again. I apologize for that. Okay.
In a famous psychological test, when children are asked to draw a scientist, this is the sort of thing that they draw. They draw some facial hair, they draw someone who has glasses, they draw someone who is bald, they draw some wild partial hair, they draw someone who has a lab coat on, someone who has a tie on, and then usually they draw some kind of flask with something bubbling in it. But maybe more important and revealing is that who they draw is overwhelmingly male and white. Caucasian kids draw Caucasian scientists. Native American kids draw Caucasian scientists almost all the time. And African American kids draw Caucasian scientists an overwhelming majority of the time. Why is that? Well, if we look at who is pursuing a bachelor's degree in STEM, overwhelmingly these are Caucasians. Less than 25% of the people pursuing a degree in STEM are people of color. If we look at who is a full-time scientist, full-time employment in science, overwhelmingly these are Caucasian males, and less than 10% of full-time employees are Black scientists. Well, why is there a general lack of diversity in science? As we saw with the Draw a Scientist test, children of color don't see scientist role models that look like them. Their educational opportunities may be different for children of color. Science is an expensive thing to teach, and often children of color grow up in systems that are underfunded. There is strong established bias in the graduate record exam against people of color, and that is a gatekeeper to get into graduate school. And once you make it to the workplace, you may be saddled with extra assignments as one of the only diversity hires that it's hard to get ahead. Why is the lack of diversity bad for science? There's studies that have been done that show that the more ethnically diverse a research group is, the more likely they are to publish, and the more likely that those publications will receive citations. Also, there's a definite problem and disconnect with trust of scientists among more diverse populations, that white people tend to trust scientists more than Blacks and Hispanics do. And this is a problem, especially during this pandemic. It's difficult to recognize or understand the effects of transgenerational trauma that certain minority groups have endured and continue to navigate if you aren't particularly impacted. If you are impacted, sometimes it's difficult to know or to identify true allies because of the effects of transgenerational trauma. So how can we collectively be advocates? Well, one thing all of us can do is listen. Listen to our colleagues, listen to their experience, and believe them when they say they have an experience that is different than ours. Be open to your own bias. As scientists, we're trained to avoid bias in our experiments, but bias is a part of being human, and all of us have bias. And the more we recognize what that bias is when we go into a situation, the more we can help our colleagues and help ourselves. You can educate yourself. There are scientific papers on this topic, and you can learn about the challenges that minorities face in science. When you see minorities that are impacted by an action in a scientific setting, speak up and say, hey, this is wrong. We need to rethink what we're doing here. As a scientist, this is bad for science, and this is bad for our colleagues. For more information, please contact.
Okay, so that was the video. Let's bring back up the slides. So probably half of you are like, what does that have to do with sustainability, Dr. McKenzie? I get it, it's about diversity. So I don't want us to miss the forest for the trees, right? Because sustainability is a very important and relevant topic these days. But what I want to kind of plant in the back of your minds is, how are we thinking about sustainability, and how are these thoughts about sustainability affecting society? So for example, if I bring up this image here, right? So what we can assume is that these are people living in poverty. What does sustainability mean to them, right? And how are they being included in this conversation about sustainability? Because I didn't have, at least because I forgot that I had to give a talk today, I didn't have a chance to include a few other slides. But I have colleagues on the other side of the world who are thinking about sustainability from the perspective of a refugee, right? So imagine, for example, being forced from your home, not having the economic means to support yourself. What does sustainability mean in that sense, right? Because while globally we have issues of waste and issues related to overproduction and overutilization of resources, there are certain people who are dealing with so much in their lives that that's far removed from them, right? So how would we design sustainability for people like this, right? And how will we include them whenever we're thinking about energy savings? Because with the trajectory that the world is currently on in terms of waste management, usually it's the people who can least afford to deal with some of these issues who have to deal with these issues. So it's usually, the poor amongst us. So whenever we think about sustainability, we always have to think about the social side as well, which is why I included that discussion about diversity, because we have to ensure that whatever issue it is that we're trying to face, right, that even though that it will benefit the people who are most deserving first, right? Because if it benefits them, then it's almost guaranteed that it benefits everyone. So a lot of the issues that we're seeing, especially, for example, with the mining industry, in the mining industry, there is a lot of people who would say, for example, we should never put an end to the mining industry because of the wonderful technology that we have before us. But the question I would always challenge someone with is, well, if we look at this picture, right, do these people care about the mining industry? Probably not, right? What they care most about is where their next meal is coming from, whether or not they can fix that leaky roof, whether or not they can actually use some of this technology to help advance themselves. So that's the one thing I kind of want to impress upon you. When we start thinking about sustainability, there's always this societal aspect that we have to include. So, we just talked about this issue on representation in STEM fields, and what the discussion kind of centered around was the fact that there's a lack of representation, but also this notion or this perception that the STEM fields are more or less monochromatic when it comes to ethnic representation. But what we've, at least what the discussion kind of touched upon was the fact that if you only have one set of people guiding the discussion in STEM fields, right? How will that impact sustainability? Because it's really tough to look outside of ourselves, right? To really understand how we're impacting what's going on in the world. So if you only have this subset of people who are talking about sustainability, and it turns out that the subset is not well represented ethnically or even based off gender, then what usually will be the result is that lack of perspective, right? And that's the reason that I showed this stat in the beginning, because science will always need perspective, right? It will always need that counter thought, that thought about, hey, what about this solution? What about these people? How are they affected by some of these decisions? Because historically, I'm not sure if much of you follow the history of science and the history of STEM, but historically, science has always been an elitist aim, right? It's always the people who can afford to do science does science, right? Everybody else would do other things, right? If I ask you, for example, what was Sir Isaac Newton's day job, nobody would really know, right? He was actually closer to being a nobleman. But even that same mentality still pervades till this day, right? That it's only a certain class of people who can be a scientist. But when we talk about the notion of sustainability, the decisions that a scientist makes affects the world, right? Affects us globally. So we always have to ensure that in spite of the challenges that the STEM fields are currently facing in terms of just representation based off human capital, it's very important because there are real problems in the world, right? There are these challenges based off just human advancement, right? Our drive to advance our respective societies economically, technologically, and to a certain degree socially. But these decisions are always impactful, right? And we always have to think about not just let me rephrase. What we have to think about is not just about the advances that we're making technologically, but socially, how are they being impactful as well, right? So if I were to go back to that village by the train station, you would probably see that, usually a lot of the issues kind of pile up on the people at the lower end of the socioeconomic ladder. And when it comes to this notion of sustainability, are we truly being sustainable by essentially shoveling the buck down to them, where they don't really have the capacity to even manage or deal with some of these issues. In fact, again, I apologize for not being fully prepared. What I was going to show was just how inventive some of the people at the lower end of the socioeconomic rung, how innovative they're being when it comes to their notion of sustainability. Because for them, sustainability also ties in with survivability, right? Because sometimes it's just a matter of life and death, whether or not they get through the day or get that next meal. So they have to be quite resourceful when it comes to seeing the challenges that the world faces, but understanding that they themselves have also challenges that are probably larger than what us who are more comfortable can even understand or even appreciate. So my advice to you as your advisor is, when you're thinking about sustainability, try to think of it as a balancing act, right? On one hand, we appreciate what industry does for us, right? If it weren't for industry, right, I wouldn't be able to be giving this wonderful talk on this magnificent laptop with 3 screens in front of me and this wonderful cup of tea that stayed hot my whole day, right? But my philosophy is also that human advancement, especially human technological advancement, always has some social or societal cost. And when we think about sustainability, are we having enough conversations about diversity? Not just ethnic diversity, like what the slides talk about, but social diversity. Because as I showed in the beginning, people have a range of aptitudes, and I've met many people who don't have Ivy League educations, but who are incredibly smart people, who essentially can't afford these opportunities to become a part of that discussion. So what my challenge to the ESW cohort would be is to kind of start asking these questions about sustainability and societal disparities, right? So one simple question could be, if we made a material or designed a material that could be infinitely recycled, how does this benefit the poorest amongst us, right? How does this benefit the person who will likely have to end up dealing with this waste eventually? And that's usually something that we don't talk much about. In fact, and I'll probably just end it here so I don't go on for too long. In a lot of societies where recycling is becoming a challenge, so if you're not familiar with the story, usually when we put our recycling in these wonderful recycling bins, we all had this perception that our recycling went to a factory somewhere in America and got reprocessed into wonderful new material. In fact, what actually happened was most of America doesn't have the proper recycling infrastructure. So we're actually sending a lot of our recycling overseas. And then it turns out that a lot of this stuff was just sitting in warehouses, right? Piling up in warehouses till the point where China said, we are no longer collecting recycling from anyone. We have way too much. And what started happening was all of a sudden people start just throwing trash in the water all over again. And what would usually happen was a lot of this trash ends up amongst the poor. So then the poor ends up having to deal with this trash up on top of all the other issues that they have to deal with. So I'm not saying that that what we're doing isn't altruistic. It's very altruistic. But what I want to do is just broaden your perspective on just the notion of sustainability, especially when it comes to this topic of diversity. Because of a lack of overall representation, what I often realize is that there isn't this much needed sensitivity to the societal impacts of this drive towards sustainability. And rightfully so, we usually can only see what's in front of us. So my sole goal today was just to broaden your perspectives a bit and have you see beyond that dot that I put in front of you. And hopefully so, even though my slides were a bit all over the place. Again, I apologize for that. They will be more polished, so maybe sometime next year I'll give you the true slides. But that was my presentation, and I welcome any questions. If you were looking for a scientific talk, I apologize. Since I did a scientific talk last time, I felt like talking about some of the societal and social things that some colleagues and I are working on.
Do you have any suggestions on how to get the different societal groups more involved? Because I think one, at least in America, I know in other countries it's harder for us to reach out to them, but in America, a lot of it has to deal with the school system, right? So like if you're never really exposed to STEM as a child, or if you don't realize that that is an option, you're just never going to be a part of it, right? So how do we, I know in Akron there are a lot more options for these kids, but to be honest, where I grew up, I didn't realize really that I could be a scientist, and I grew up in the middle of like a farm. Like I had no idea, and I got lucky that later after high school I figured out that I wanted to go to school for engineering. But like how do we, I don't know, how can I make this more of a change?
That's actually a good question. I think that's the question a lot of people are grappling with now. So I've been talking a lot with the Akron public school system. But what I tend to do, because I am one of the few Black scientists and professor educators that I know, I just get on my megahorn, and I say it loudly. There's not a lot of us around here, and there needs to be more of us. So one example that we actually cut from the video, because I think it hit a little too close to home for some people. But because there was not representation in STEM fields historically, a lot of Black people were made subjects to very horrible and heinous scientific experiments. So you can look into the Tuskegee experiment, for example, where they were intentionally giving Black people syphilis and seeing what would happen to them. And since then, a lot of things have changed, right? There's been a lot of ethics review board. I think that was one of the studies that made people form ethics review boards for science. But the reason I bring it up for the issue of sustainability is sometimes what may be sustainable for us may be difficult for someone else to be able to sustain. So what I would challenge you all to do is maybe to go to some of these communities and see what their true needs are. So I had a colleague, a really wonderful guy, very brilliant scientist, who is I believe he's the director of the Grantham Institute at, I forgot what school he teaches at. I apologize, but works for the Grantham Institute. And what he did was he heard of a refugee community that was in need of a garden. They didn't have the means to supply themselves or even nourish themselves. So he went there to see what he could do. And his solution for them was now he's growing gardens out of mattresses, old used mattresses. So he figured out a way to tie in sustainability to a societal need. And that is what I would say for, for you guys, thinking about how to essentially really drive this notion of sustainability, but to make it more impactful societally, right? So I would say just go into some of these communities and see what the need is, and to use your drive towards reducing waste and improving technological reliance, to see how you can be of service to these communities. Because what that would do is it will just pay dividends, right? Because one, you'll be exposing a community that's disenfranchised into letting them know that, hey, there's people out there who care about them. But also, if there are people that look like me there, they would say, oh, I see me now on the other side. You are my inspiration, and I will try to be like you now, Miss Scientist Lady, who now makes me believe that I can be a scientist and that I can solve this leaky roof problem that I have with this interesting sustainable material that you told me about, right? So it's really just trying to get things to come full circle. And that I believe is one of the big challenges in sustainability, and a reason that if you kind of pay attention to just the language that people use around this notion of sustainability, you see people kind of shying away from the word sustainability, because it's really a gargantuan word, right? How can we sustain everything when there are all these clear disparities in the world, right? Who are we sustaining? What are we sustaining? So when it comes to materials, they use the term circular now, and that's just and that's just how it is. But what I try to do, what I try to do is I try to bring things full circle, right? I try to say, well, if it wasn't for someone pointing at me and say, I believe in you and you should be a scientist, I'm not sure what I would be doing with myself. But there are a lot of people who have problems that sustainability can help, right? And I think if we just immerse ourselves in these communities, be brave about immersing ourselves in these communities, let them know that we're here to help. They will be more than welcoming in having us help them and hopefully finding tangible solutions. I see a hand from Josh, but I'm not sure if that was there a long time ago.
Yeah, that was a long time.
Okay. So again, I want to apologize. I was not fully prepared to give this talk, but I did have a few slides in my slide deck. But hopefully my point came across, was that while sustainability is a really noble cause and a noble goal, we really have to start thinking about sustainability in a really global context as to who or what is sustainability actually serving. Because yes, there's sustainability for the economic bottom line, but if the economic bottom line means somebody else has to keep suffering for this sustainable technology to be possible, is that true sustainability, right? And that's where I say, okay, I'm not a social scientist, but that's a good question for someone in the social sciences to kind of help us answer. And what actually something else I should encourage you all to do. So when it comes to sustainability, it's a multi-level problem. I know I will assume that most of you are engineers, but I will encourage you to invite your colleagues from the social sciences, from the education sciences, really from all corners, because that's the only way we'll actually get to any sort of true sustainability, right? Because if the scientists, you give a scientist a toy, we'll keep playing all day. But if it's not useful to society, then really what's the point, right? So even if we made this material that we can infinitely recycle, will that truly benefit society, right? The jury hasn't spoken on that yet. I know a lot of social scientists would be excited about that. A lot of people would be excited about it, but will it change societal behaviors? For example, one argument I put forward is if we make something that's infinitely recyclable, then it won't give anyone any incentive to ever want to recycle it, right? They'll just start throwing it everywhere. So we really have to start educating from the ground up, really, on what sustainability really means, right? So there has to be a radical rethinking of not just the sciences, but really society, right? And how we approach living. Oh yeah, I don't want to rant on too much, but yeah, that's sense.
Dr. McKenzie, thanks so much. It's such an informative talk. Yeah, I love what you said about immersing yourself in these communities. I think we can all learn a lot from doing that, and we'll see definitely a positive change from that for sure.
Yeah, and you'd be surprised. That's where, at least for me, that's where the real engineering comes out. So there was this show a long time ago. I think it was called like Junkyard Wars or something like that, where you had to like design really technical things with only what you can find around. That's usually how we find answers for some of these communities, because we have to remind ourselves that they are resource strapped, so they can't go out and buy the fanciest thing. So how can we support them to essentially be self-sufficient? And self-sufficiency is kind of an indirect way of saying sustainable as well. So how can we essentially integrate some of these thoughts on waste management through helping some of these communities? Because half of our problem is just a waste management issue, right? People don't handle waste properly, especially in some of these communities where they have a million other things to worry about, right? So how can we be their Jiminy Crickets without waving our fingers at them? That's what I like to say. Cool. Thank you for these questions, and I look forward to seeing just some of the fruits of your labor. I know you guys are very active. Whenever I talk about any student groups, I'm like, look what these people are doing. They are so active. And now that I'm your advisor, I'm like, oh, look at what my people are doing. They are so active. I really commend you all. And the one suggestion I have is, open up your doors to the non-scientists, and you'll realize just how much more tangible solutions to some of these problems will become. It's actually that was actually one of the advice my colleague from the Grantham Institute told me. He said, if you want to solve these problems, you can't just have scientists in a room, right? You'll need maybe someone studying economics, someone in the social sciences. You all put your heads together and you realize that not only did you create this wonderful new material, but you've essentially developed the product chain and the economics, and ensuring that it can actually benefit some ethnic group or some societal group.
Yeah, our doors are definitely open. We just have trouble finding them to come.
Yeah, I think if you say we don't just cater to engineers, but I might be able to find some guys, some people for you, through this OVA initiative. So yeah, so I'll try to send people your way.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate you guys for having me. Again, I wholly apologize for being underprepared to present today. but hopefully you all were entertained by this video, where my colleague and I are trying to get it a bit more polished and refined for distribution, just to kind of help bring awareness to some of these issues in STEM, especially when it comes to underrepresentation. But if you easily look around, you'll realize that there's underrepresentation in STEM. But it doesn't necessarily have to be that way. And I think as a society, we're all moving forward to improving and enhancing representation across the spectrum of educational opportunities, right? Not just STEM. But yeah, I wish you guys all the best. And thanks again for having me.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. This one presentation.
Oh, thank you. It would have been more polished, but you know, the show must go on, I say.
It's fine. It was still great.
All right. Take care, everyone.
Thank you. You too.
I don't know. We usually like stick around and discuss how it went.
Hi. Danny, are you okay? Do you have the casts on still?
No, I'm all good.
That's awesome.
Yeah. Hurts kind of sometimes, but that's okay. Not supposed to feel good, I guess.
Did you break like your femur or like what part of your leg did you break?
The tibia and fibia, so both of the lower leg bones.
That's awful.
Yeah.
Danny, what'd you do? How'd this happen?
A lot of ways.
All right.
I think that went really well.
I think so. I thought it was a really good discussion. It's a really good thing to keep in mind for sure.
Yeah. I think if
ESW member Drew.
If we were able to do more community outreach, I think that would be a good thing. But I'm trying. Josh, remember when we went to Heritage Middle School?
Yes.
Was that something Heidi set up, or was that something they set
Wait, is
up?
that Josh that works at Morton Salt now?
Yeah.
It's Josh
That's
that works
the one
at
and
Morton
only.
Salt.
Yeah, it's Josh.
Oh,
I
I
don't
thought
know.
there was a different Josh. I was
Come
like,
on,
how does
Danny.
like know who I am? But is it just because Kayla said my name? Never mind.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
something that Heidi Cressman put on. She is the director of diversity and inclusion. So if you guys aren't talking to her, I would definitely have generate some conversations with her, because she's the one who always sent me those volunteer opportunities and was always looking for a helping hand on this and that activity and event, whether that be on campus or at another high school or middle school or something. But I'm not too sure what she's doing now. Yeah, definitely keep her in your loop of people.
I think while he was talking, I was kind of thinking of how like things that we could outreach with, and once we get Bike Power kind of like we have our product, that'd be something cool to like take to a middle school or even a high school and say like,
Look at this.
Look at this. Like this is
Sustainable.
This is something you can do. I don't know. But
Yeah, I definitely agree. It'd be nice when we have something physical to show.
Yeah, hurry up, Josh.
No, sorry.
did you see my message in Slack?
I did, yeah.
Okay.
Kayla has a lead also, so I'm gonna wait to figure that out, and then I might reach out to them.
Okay.
Okay, you said.
There's also, it's called Standard Welding in Medina. My parents live really close to there. I don't know if they do like machining though. I know that they like do welding. I picked up stuff there when I worked construction over the summer, but there's just another option. So.
Yeah, I think we're looking in good shape, especially if ASEC 51 is as early as spring semester. That'd be good.
All right, well, I'll let you guys go. I'm gonna go attempt to finish my statics homework. So we'll see how that goes. But see you guys later.
Yeah.
Bye.
Bye.
Man, Kayla's just getting all the praise.
Hello.
Hey, sorry. I just want to ask you a quick question.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just want to chat about elections for officers. I know you mentioned it a little bit, but how's that shaping up? What is that looking like?
We haven't talked about it much, honestly. Our meeting is tomorrow. Our officer meeting is tomorrow. So I don't know who is still interested in staying in the same positions.
Okay. Are you doing it like a voting base, or how we did in previous years?
No,
I
we're
guess we just
doing it like we did last year. So like we're gonna have people sign up, and then I guess officers are voting on positions.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Cool. Yeah. I was gonna say, yeah, try to figure that out sooner rather than later.
Yes, and I didn't know how else to word it other than election. You know what I mean? I didn't know transition sounded. I don't know.
I think we just call them interviews.
Oh. Okay.
Officer interviews or.
Okay.
Yeah, because I mean that's basically what we did. I remember interviewing Megan and Michaela and somebody else, I think. Maybe Elena? I don't know. Yeah, okay. Yeah, I just wanted to double check.
Yep. I think everyone. Oh, was Lori graduating this year?
Should be.
But I think she's considering graduate school at Akron, so
Oh,
she
is she?
might. Yeah, she is actually. So she's trying to get in. I think if she doesn't this year, she's gonna try again to get in the following year. She'll probably get in though.
Yeah, I would be surprised if you didn't.
They want all of our money, so.
Right. All right, cool. Well, yeah. Like I can ditto what Dr. McKenzie was saying that you guys do so much and so many great things. So keep up the great work.
Well, thank you. Thank you for all your advising. We really appreciate it.
It's the least I can do. If I can do more, I would. And if I can, let me know.
Okay, we will. Thank you, Josh.
All right. Well, have a good night.
You too. Bye.
Bye.